प्रातः स्मरामि हृदि संस्फुरदात्मतत्त्वं सच्चित्सुखं परमहं सगतिं तुरीयं यत्स्वप्नजागरसुषुप्तमवैति नित्यं तद्ब्रह्म निष्कलमहं न च भूतसङ्गः तपोभिक्षीणपापानां शान्तानां वीतरागिणां मुमुक्षूणामपेक्षोऽयम् आत्मबोधो विधीयते बोधोऽन्यसाधनेभ्यो हि साक्षान्मोक्षैकसाधनं पाकस्य वह्निवज्ञानं विना मोक्षो न सिद्ध्यति. We'll chant from verses 20 to 24. Verse number 20 to 24 of chapter 4. त्यक्त्वा कर्मफलासङ्गं नित्यतृप्तो निराश्रयः कर्मण्यभिप्रवृत्तोऽपि नैव किञ्चित् करोति सः. त्यक्त्वा कर्मफलासङ्गं नित्यतृप्तो निराश्रयः कर्मण्यभिप्रवृत्तोऽपि नैव किञ्चित् करोति सः. निराशीर्यतचित्तात्मा त्यक्त्य सर्वपरिग्रहः शारीरं केवलं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्. निराशीर्यतचित्तात्मा त्यक्त्वा सर्वपरिग्रहः शारीरं केवलं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्. यदृच्छालाभसन्तुष्टः द्वन्द्वातीतो विमत्सरः समसिद्धावसिद्धौ च कृत्वा विपनिबध्यते. यदृच्छालाभसन्तुष्टः द्वन्द्वातीतो विमत्सरः समसिद्धावसिद्धौ च कृत्वापि न निबध्यते. गतसङ्गस्य मुक्तस्य ज्ञानावस्थितचेतसः यज्ञायाचरतः कर्म समग्रं प्रविलीयते. गतसङ्गस्य मुक्तस्य ज्ञानावस्थितचेतसः यज्ञायाचरतः कर्म समग्रं प्रविलीयते. ब्रह्मार्पणं ब्रह्महविः ब्रह्माग्नौ ब्रह्मणाहुतं ब्रह्मैव तेन गन्तव्यं ब्रह्मकर्मसमाधिना. ब्रह्मार्पणं ब्रह्महविः ब्रह्माग्नौ ब्रह्मणाहुतं ब्रह्मैव तेन गन्तव्यं ब्रह्मकर्मसमाधिना. Okay, chapter 4, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Apologies for Tuesday. I only got back home at like 3 a.m. So it became quite impossible. But let's see, maybe by the end of the class, at the end of the class, we discuss if we can make up for Tuesday's class. But before we start, are there any questions? Yeah, Prachi.
So I have a question for the 16th verse. Uh, Here we speak about, karma and akarma, and here it says that, when a good desire propels your action, you acquire a good vasana, and when a bad desire propels action, you acquire a bad vasana. And karma could be equated to all devolutionary actions. So basically, what I want to ask is, how is a good desire devolutionary, and what does good actually mean then in this context?
Okay. So look, here he is giving you two possible ways of interpreting karma and akarma. Of course, in the next verse, in the 17th verse, he even introduced this term called vikarma, right? So if you were to take the second interpretation, then 17th verse becomes sort of a natural flow. But he's introduced these two terms called karma and akarma, right? Which is so the verse actually reads, even the wise here are deluded as to what is action and what is inaction. Therefore, I shall teach you action, knowing which you will be liberated from evil. So, first of all, the idea is that the wise themselves are confused about this because this is a very deep subject. Ultimately, law of karma is the idea of karma is very deep, linking causality, cause and effect. It's almost impossible. And this chain is incomprehensible, the chain of karma. The chain of karma that has brought you here and that has resulted in the world around you, your circumstances, your nature, your being. It's incomprehensible. You can't extend the chain beyond a few points of causation. So it's deep. Even the wise are confused as to about this chain and the nature of action. However, he says in the beginning of this paragraph, karma and akarma convey more than their literal meaning. From a relative point of view, karma encompasses all desire-ridden action which produce vasanas, whereas akarma represents desireless actions. So this is one perspective he's saying. Look, if you want to see it from this perspective, this is one possible interpretation. If you see it from this interpretation, karma would be desire-ridden action, whereas akarma is desireless action, right? Whereas, I mean, perhaps an inspiration for that interpretation is that akarma means being inactive while acting, right? Not accumulating sort of vasanas. So, in that sense, or rather, that begs the question: what action produces vasanas, and what action liberates us from vasanas, right? If you're saying so far, I only knew of action that accumulates vasanas, right? So he's saying that desire-ridden action can be from a relative perspective, karma encompasses all desire-ridden actions which produce vasanas. And these could be good or bad. So when a good desire propels your action, you acquire a good vasana. Bad desire propels action, you acquire a bad vasana. Either way, vasanas are devolutionary. Why? Because they take you away from, or they are making you accumulate ignorance, in a sense, right? So karma here could be equated to all devolutionary actions which produce vasanas, good or bad, because they are adding to your pile, in a sense. Whereas akarma is beyond selfish or unselfish actions, is selfless action, is full objectivity, is seeing the world as a stage, is being that actor on stage, is being simply playing your role. That stance of complete objectivity which comes through knowledge. And when you perform action in this manner, it is called desireless action. Why is it evolutionary? Because no vasanas are created. No further vasanas are created. Whatever is getting expressed is getting exhausted, and there's nothing being added, right? So desire free actions or desireless actions or selfless actions dedicated to a higher altar. In a yajna, the altar is the fire. So the desireless or desire free actions dedicated to a higher altar do not produce vasanas, they simply exhaust the existing vasanas. Right? So this is one perspective.
Yeah, so that's what my question was, that if a good desire is propelling you to acquire a good vasana, and then that is devolutionary, then how exactly is good? Like, are we speaking of good in a very relative sense, in a limited sense, ultimately, right? When we speak of good vasanas, in the absolute sense, when it comes to your overall spiritual evolution, there are no such things as good vasana than good desires or good desire-ridden actions. Maybe in the worldly.
Yeah. So if you're looking at it from the lens of, the development of your personality, sure, a good desire is a good action in that sense, right? A good desire leads to a good action, and a bad desire leads to a bad action, or a negative desire leads to a negative action. A selfish desire leads to a selfish action, which is bad. So, from one lens, if you're looking from the perspective of self development, unselfish is good, whereas selfish is bad. If you're looking at it from a different lens, if you're looking at it from a lens of enlightenment, if you look at it from a lens of the ultimate liberation, then all actions, good or bad, are simply adding to the samsara, right? And at some point, you have to go from being even unselfish to selfless. Now, the whole point is that you can't go from being selfish and attached and entangled and fully caught up in the world to being selfless all at once. Unselfishness is a stepping stone. So, through these values, through a process of self development, it's almost a primer, right? It's a primer you put to you, or if you want to repaint a wall, you can't go from one color to the other color automatically. You first have to put a primer. You're adding a paint, which is in a sense, not what you need, like not the color you eventually want, but it's a very essential sort of middle step. Primer, you make it white, right? So any color wall, you make it white. And how much white do you need? Depends on how dark your wall is, right? So if your wall is already very light, you need just a little bit of primer, and then you're ready to apply the coat you eventually want, right? So unselfish action is a stepping stone. It in a sense, while it adds to your vasanas, it makes it more conducive for the selfless action. And it brings you to a place where you can comprehend. For all practical purposes, for you and me, for 99% of humanity, unselfish action is good action, selfish action is bad action. Why? Because selfish action entangles us further with bad vasanas, and unselfish action disentangles us or entangles us in good things, good vasanas, right? So bad entanglement is entanglement in negative values. Good entanglement, if there was such a thing, is entanglement in positive values. But ultimately, the goal is no entanglement. Mukti. Right?
Okay. Thank you.
Rashmi ji.
So my question is from the verse 18. In the last paragraph, it's written, in objectivity, one sees the inactive self in all actions as well as the potential and possibility of actions in the inactive self. So the first part I've understood, the second part I've not understood. The potential and possibility of actions in the inactive self. This part I've...
Is it the last? Where is it?
Yeah, last was of 18.
Ah. So this verse attempts to define objectivity and explain a method to practice it. In objectivity, one sees the inactive self in all actions as well as the potential and possibility of actions in the inactive self. Right? To see inaction in action. That's the first part. To see inaction in action means through any action recognizing and realizing the underlying inactive principle, the Atman. So underlying any individual with their vasanas, with their various gunas and qualities of actions, lies the inactive Sakshi, the Atman. And then, as well as the potential and possibility of actions in the inactive self. Idea being that the self being the inactive cause for action, the self being the inactive enlivener of action, can create an endless possibility and potential. There's no limit to what is possible. It's like there's no limit to what is possible through electricity. It's only limited by your own conception. It's only limited by what you can conceive, nothing else. Right? Electricity forms the base, energy forms the base for any kind of expression. Right? Who would have thought that so much energy can lie within an atom? Only when nuclear physicists discovered the potential did they realize that so much is possible, good or bad. So it's only limited by our potential to conceive any kind of action, good, bad, grand, small, right? When you're starting an endeavor, when you're starting any action, आपकी सोच छोटी है तो एक्शन छोटी होगी, सोच बड़ी है तो एक्शन बड़ी होगी, right? The potential and possibility is endless, all arising from that inactive Atman, the potential to the enlivening principle, that potential to act, right? You leverage that, you utilize that, and sky's the limit.
Can you give an example? I'm still not clear about this.
No, the idea being that there's no example as such to give. That action has endless potential. That's all he's saying. right? On the one hand, when you see an action, recognize that beyond vasanas lies the underlying Atman. And in a empty canvas, understand that the canvas opens up all possibilities. You can paint whatever you want on the canvas, right? So it goes both ways. When you see a painting, see the underlying canvas. Recognize that supporting the painting is the canvas. And on the contrary, when you see an empty canvas, anything can be painted on top of it. It's endless. The possibility is endless, right? Only limited by your capacity to conceive. Someone with grand vasanas will perform a grand action. Someone with feeble vasanas will have silly painting. You ask me to paint something, I'll draw a house and a stream. You ask a painter to paint something, what can they create? Right? So it all depends on one's vasanas. Vasanas will create the painting. The canvas is simply allowing for that endless potential to see action in inaction. Whatever vasanas a person possesses, so will be their expression. Right?
Understood.
So a person with deep spiritual insight can assess a person's vasanas, and they can perhaps prophesize. This fellow is going to go far, or this person will do big things, or has the potential to do big things. On the empty canvas in the beginning of one's life, for all practical purposes, you're beginning your life at the age of 19, 20, whatever, 18. And by that time your personality has developed, any person with deep insight can assess you and say, great things can come out of here. Right? So the potential for action is endless. The possibility of action is endless on the empty canvas. Okay. So we covered verse number 19. He whose undertakings are free from desire and expectation, whose actions are burnt by the fire of knowledge, the wise call him a sage. We covered this, right? Him the wise call a sage. So this is what people with some standing, right? The wise, not the foolish. The wise call such a person a sage. Who is a sage? Right? These are essential qualities. One whose undertakings are free from desire and expectation. On the one hand, there is no ignorance of desire. There is no desire in action. The sage is one who acts in a complete spirit of yajna, not out of a selfish or unselfish desire, but full objectivity. This is the part I have to play. Let me play to the best of my ability. Free from desire. That's what it means to be free from desire. And expectation. Free from expectation means having a total spirit of surrender. I'm doing my bit. Let nature take its course as to what results has to accrue. I'm playing my part to the best of my ability, and let life take its course. Such a person whose actions are burnt by the fire of knowledge, the bulk of their vasanas, the bulk of their desires are burnt by this spiritual knowledge, this awareness when one embarks on the path of karma yoga, the knowledge of karma itself, the deep insight of karma, helps one burn the bulk of their vasanas. Such a person is well established on the path of spiritual evolution. Such a person is a sage. No sage self proclaims, I am a sage. It takes a wise person to acknowledge this person's on the path. Anybody saying, I'm a yogi, I'm a sage. See, the sage is one who is in a path of self-effacement. A sage is one who is in the path of self-effacement. Effacement means erasing oneself, erasing one's ego, erasing one's false identity. Which is why when you ultimately reach a certain stage of maturity, when you take up sannyas, your guru gives you a different name altogether. That's the tradition. When you're ready to take sannyas, what happens? Your old name is removed and you're given a new name. Swami Chinmayanand. That wasn't his original name. Go check out his original name. Scores and hundreds and thousands of such sages who live with a new name, a new identity, one that reflects liberation rather than that old acquired identity of samsara. So when one sufficiently progresses on this journey and is ready to ultimately let go of their false past egoistic identity, that's when one completely drops. It's symbolic, right? One completely drops their name altogether. That name is symbolic of one's past ignorance, one's past false identity, and the new name is symbolic of their entire commitment to attain complete liberation, complete enlightenment beyond name and form. Which is why these names are not, these names have a complete reference to spiritual evolution, nothing else. Premananda, Chinmayananda, Vivekananda. These all have a reference to one's spiritual growth and spiritual enlightenment. No other reference. They're not called Yash. See, our names themselves, our regular names themselves are quite spiritual. But this is, one's name after sannyas leaves no room for any worldly entanglement. It's entirely spiritual liberation. That's it. That's the sole purpose. Such a person is a sage. Such a person, the wise scholar, sage, who is free from such hang-ups in life. Verse number 20. Tyaktva karma phala sangam nitya tripto nirashrayah karmanyabhipravrittopi naiva kinchit karoti saha. Tyaktva karma phala sangam nitya tripto nirashrayah karmanyabhipravrittopi naiva kinchit karoti saha. Having renounced attachment to fruit of action, tyaktva karma phala sangam, having renounced karma phala, fruit of action, sangha, attachment. So having renounced attachment to fruit of action, ever content, nitya tripta, depending on nothing, nirashraya. Ashraya, the word ashram comes from this, right? Ashraya, dependence, support. Nirashraya means without dependence, not needing any support, no dependence, independent. Nitya tripta, ever content. He does not do anything although he is engaged in action. So he goes on to further describe a sage, right? Verse number 19 gives some qualities, verse number 20 gives further qualities. A sage is one who is established on the spiritual path, who has made good amount of progress, right? Having renounced attachment to fruit of action, realizing that there's nothing the world can give me. What I'm looking for is beyond what this world has to offer. I'm simply here to play my part and get off the stage. That's the attitude. Having renounced attachment to fruit of action. See, here he's clarifying, because elsewhere he says renouncing fruit of action, renouncing fruit of action. So that gives a sense, oh, does that mean I should not enjoy the fruit? No. What you have to renounce is your attachment to the fruit, your preoccupation, your anxiety, your ever wish and longing for a certain outcome and result. This anxiety, this angst creates a lot of dependency, confusion, wishful longing, wishful thinking, and ultimately hampers your action. So having renounced attachment to fruit of action means one who is not longing for any particular outcome. Whatever outcome comes, prasadam adhigacchati. He accepts them. He accepts that in a spirit of a prasada. This is what nature has given me as a result for my efforts. I accept it gracefully. So that gracefulness is reflected in your detachment. You are detached from the fruit of action. So you're doing action with a selfless spirit. You're doing action with a desirelessly, and you are detached from the outcome of it. Ever content, nitya tripta. Elsewhere, when he's talking about the qualities of a devotee, of a bhakta, he gives 35 qualities of a bhakta. I think the 7th or 8th quality is also something similar. It says, Santushta Satatam. Santushta Satatam Yogi Yatatma Drida Nishchaya. Santushta Satatam. Ever content. Nitya Tripta. Nitya means forever. Tripta means content. Ever content. So whether you are talking about a yogi, a bhakta, a sage, a pandita, all of these are synonyms. People think, oh, I've learned 30 more qualities. Actually, no. He's explained it before. They all are the same person. Whether you call him a jnani, a bhakta, whatever you want to call it. So, one who is nitya tripta, ever content. We are ever discontent. Okay, I don't expect you to be nitya tripta, but at least be tript sometimes, na. We don't want to be a sage, vage and all. Forget being a sage. But at least be normal. We are nitya discontent. Always discontent. Kuch bhi kar lo. If at all we are content for like 2 minutes before the next wish and the next complaint arises. So appreciate that the goal is to become nitya tripta, but we should start by at least at the end of the day, remembering the Lord, having an attitude of gratitude, and being content. If you're not content with what you have, you'll not be content with what you're going to get. If it is a it's misunderstanding that thirst and greed can really take you anywhere. But when we say the word content out here, we don't mean the tamasic contentment. We're not talking about pig's contentment, right? There's a big difference between pig's contentment and this sattvic contentment. Pig's contentment is contentment with mediocrity, is contentment in inaction. Herein, we're talking about a dynamic contentment. Big difference. Here we're talking about an active person who is engaged in the world, who is conscious of the good and the bad, who's conscious of the right and the wrong, who's conscious of what's working and what's not working, who's conscious that they have a role to play and participate in making the world just a better place with every passing day. So this contentment doesn't arise from the fact that, oh, whatever is there is good. No, that's a pig's contentment. This contentment arises from that spiritual clarity that the world is a flux of karma. Everything, it's a made up of dvandva. There's going to be good and bad. There's no world where there's only good. There's no world where there's only bad. There's no world where there's only joy. There's no world where there's only sorrow. This world is all shades of grey. It's a beautiful painting of nuance. And I'm simply playing my part. There's a deep sense of peace and contentment that comes from that realization. Seeing yourself as a spoke in the wheel, seeing yourself as a part in the whole, seeing your small, tiny little life as a single episode in this entire drama of life. You live but 100 years. Of course, with your actions, you can influence the world for thousands of years. If you're a Krishna, if you're a Vyasa, no doubt. That's the maximum one has gotten. And for that, you have to already be, you have to be wielding an incredible influence. But in the larger scheme of things, I think that perspective, I think we've, somewhere we have read, right? Like if all of the history of the earth was maybe a book of a couple of 100 pages, then we are the last letter of the last sentence of the last page. All of humanity, all of human history is the last letter of the last page in a big fat book. And tomorrow, this will also become avyakt. Right now it is vyakt, right now it is manifest. Tomorrow this will also become unmanifest. This wave will fall back into the ocean. That awareness is what brings a deep sense of clarity. So far removed from tamasic contentment, which is a resignation, which is a laziness, which is a ignorance, right? This deep contentment comes from understanding that I'm simply playing a part in this entire cosmos. I'm a spoke in this field. When you think of yourself as the main character, it's very draining. It's extremely draining. You think everyone has to function according to your likes and dislikes. Everyone has to the world should function according to your ideas and ideologies. Be ever discontent. Depending on nothing. Without dependence. Of course, in the beginning of this journey, you are dependent on a satsang. On the beginning of this journey, that's why you go to an ashram. That's why you go to a satsang. That's why you have such classes. You are dependent on the good to help you align yourself with this path. But once you're sufficiently on this path, you are dependent on nothing. You become an ashram for others. The guru in an ashram is not dependent on the ashram. Right? So you become an ashram for others. You become a refuge for others, but you yourself are independent. You're able to be true to yourself in all scenarios. Nothing can move you, nothing can shake you. You don't need the world to be a certain way. And this is very important in the spiritual journey because the entire world is going in the other direction. The entire world is functioning in a spirit of selfishness, in a spirit of attachment, in a spirit of taking rather than giving, in a spirit of deceiving. The entire world thinks that desires are what is going to get them to a better experience. So in many ways, a lot of this knowledge, and it's quite exhausting when you have to perhaps explain it to the world. It can be quite exhausting. A lot of what you hear out here and discuss out here, it's not easy to articulate to the world. So dependence on the world. If you are dependent on the environment beyond a point, you'll not be able to sustain this journey. So as this knowledge seeps deeper into you, as you gain a deeper and deeper conviction, it becomes your nature. You become independent of the world around you, the nature of those people, either of strangers or of those closest to you. In fact, more importantly, of those closest to you. You have to become independent of them. Anybody can be objective to a stranger. A madman on the streets. We all can be objective. Why? Because we simply have to drive past them. But a madman in the house? That's the real challenge. That's an extreme example. But in all our lives, we are dealing with a variety of people with a variety of natures. Now, just because they are close to you and you have been studying the Bhagavad Gita doesn't mean the wisdom of the Gita is in them. Right? So let's be fair to them also. A lot of effort is taken to manage yourself. So if someone hasn't been exposed to the right knowledge, we can't expect them to, be perfect. But at the same time, you can't be dependent. The smallest of things, the smallest shift in your environment and your mood is messed up. You're not going to get far with this. Dependent on nothing. So as I said, he's talking about a sage of perfection, one who is established on the path of perfection, ever content, dependent on nothing. Where are we? We are ever discontent, dependent on everything. So let's start one by one. Pick up one thing you want to be free from. Pick up small things. And that's for you to articulate. It's not for me to tell you what you need to be free from. And don't pick up something that's, extremely difficult. But small things. It's for you to articulate. Those on the spiritual path are almost allergic to dependence. Allergic to dependence means it's almost bothering. if they feel that, oh, they are not able to do something and they are dependent on someone else, it's not a problem to take someone's help to do something, but the need to be self-sufficient is very important. You know, back in the ashram, we, for all practical purposes, were living a life where, to a large part, we were doing our own things. The funny thing is that only when you're on this journey, only when you're conscious of this, do you realize how dependent you are on things and how you truly can't be fully independent. Even in the ashram, the entire ashram was run by the students. We tried to be as self-sufficient as possible, but it's not practical to cook all the time. It's not practical to, tend to the gardens. It's not practical to be doing welding and, other kind of, manual labor. So we had, of course, 5-6 Thais who used to come and cook in the kitchen with us. We used to have, 10 sort of garden workers who used to come and tend to environment. We used to have a contractor who used to come and do some amount of, building work and welding and any kind of fixing and this and that. But for day-to-day operations, we tried to be as self-sufficient as possible. We cleaned our own bathrooms, for starters. We used to have a roster. So the boys' hostel was divided into 4 wings. I mean, still is. And maybe each wing had like 6 or 7 people. So once a week, and every day the bathroom was cleaned. Every day the bathroom was cleaned. The shower area, the toilets, the urinals, the laundry area, everything. It means every day one person had to clean it. So once a week your turn would come. This is a small example of trying to be independent, which means that tomorrow, of course, if you're taking someone's help to do it, if you're living in a hotel, no one's asking you to, clean your own bathroom. But if tomorrow push comes to shove, you're able to do it. You're self-sufficient in that sense. Tomorrow, if your cook doesn't come, you're able to cook yourself a meal. Tomorrow, if your lady doesn't come to clean the house, your Thai doesn't come to clean the house, you're able to pick up a jhadu pocha and do it. Dependent on nothing. Tomorrow, if your travel agent is not picking up the phone, you're able to work out the logistics for your trip. So to what extent are you dependent and to what extent are you independent? Such a person who has the spirit of detachment, such a person who is ever content, such a person who is independent of nothing, completely self-sufficient, he does not do anything though he is engaged in action. Such a person is ready for performing a selfless yajna, right? And when you perform a selfless yajna, even though you're engaged in action, you're not doing anything. Not doing anything in the sense, you're not accumulating further vasanas, right? So early in the class, we talked about evolutionary action and devolutionary action. Such a person is performing evolutionary action. Even though engaged in action, they're not accumulating further vasanas. Verse number 21. Yes, Rituji, question.
Just a quick thing, sir. You mentioned Pig's contentment or something. I couldn't follow. What is that?
So, when talking about contentment, I'm saying that this contentment is not tamasic contentment. Tamasic contentment, what we, in the world as
I
a
get
term
that.
called
Yeah.
pig's contentment, right?
Okay.
Actually, unnecessarily, we have, given pigs a bad name.
Oh, pigs. P-I-G. Okay. Pig's contentment. Okay, sir. Yeah, yeah.
If you're around pigs, you'll realize they're actually very smart and clean creatures. But for some reason, we think of them as very dirty creatures. And that's where the term comes from. Oh, they're content just playing around in the mud, in the dirt. Pig contentment is, they're happy to be just around trash. A tamasic contentment is one where a person is happy with mediocrity. A person doesn't want to change anything जैसा चल रहा है वैसे चलने दो. That is fixed contentment. And that superficial contentment actually comes from a deep-seated fear of change, a deep-seated laziness to address a problem. So that's not the contentment we're talking about. That's Allah saying in relation to that point. Verse
Thank you.
number 21. निराशीर्यत चित्तात्मा त्यक्त्वा सर्वपरिग्रहः शारीरं केवलं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्. निराशीर्यत चित्तात्मा त्यक्त्वा सर्वपरिग्रहः शारीरं केवलं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्. Continuing to describe such a person who's established on the spiritual journey, who's performing selfless action, does not accumulate vasanas. That's the theme of these 5-6 verses, right? So verse number 20, he said, even though acting, they're not acting, means they're not accumulating karma. He continues in that sense, hoping for nothing, with mind and body controlled, having relinquished all possessions, doing merely bodily action, he incurs no sin. Again, from the perspective of spiritual growth, vasanas is a sin. Vasanas is a stain. It's a meli chadar, right? You remember the bhajan, meli chadar. So in that sense, it's a sin to accumulate vasanas. So he's speaking in that terminology. He's using the term sin liberally out here. Hoping for nothing, with mind and body controlled, having relinquished all possessions, doing merely bodily action. So he's describing 3 more qualities of a sage, right? 3 more attributes, 3 more descriptions of a sage. Hoping for nothing. It's very difficult if you are sitting in the first day of this class and this verse came up. Thank God it's come up in 4th chapter, 21st verse. Because first in the beginning only, if this such a term came up, you would say, oh, I don't want to be a nirashavadi. I don't want to hope for nothing. It's very difficult to explain this concept to a newcomer to the subject. And also we use the term nirash in a very negative connotation in today's day and age. So it's even more difficult to explain. But without hope means without a sense of longing. He's not talking about a pessimistic person who has lost all hope in the world. No. Means one who is really wishing and praying and hoping for something to be different from what it is. One who has a deep-seated longing, as opposed to a person who is objective, who is clear, and who sees the world as it is. Who understands that things change gradually. Who understands that the world is constantly going through a flux. It goes through 80-20. You know the 80-20 rule? It rises and evolves to a level where everything is good and wonderful. Satyug, 80%. And then it devolves all the way down to Kalyug, 20%. It doesn't become a complete hell. 80-20, 80-20. That complete objectivity. If you only see this point and disregard everything else, you'll see, oh, such a person is completely lost hope in the world. No, but that's not the idea. You have to see all of it put together. What makes them a philosopher is that such a person continues to do their part, continues to put their best foot forward, continues to perhaps add an element of positivity to an otherwise negative world, fully realizing that there are going to be few takers. Means they don't have any unreasonable expectations from the world. They are seeing things as it is. They're not pessimists. In fact, they are really optimistic because having seen the nature of the world, they're still trying. They're still putting their best foot forward. So, hoping for not, with complete objectivity, with mind and body controlled. You can't change the world. What you can change and what you can control and what you can bring under your own supervision is your own mind and body. That is under your jurisdiction, and that is what you have to guide and control to make your efforts out here fruitful. You can't control the outcome, but you can control your own mind and body. You can control your thoughts and you can regulate your senses. And that's an essential element of spiritual discipline, that your mind and body is controlled. That is what you have in your jurisdiction. Having relinquished all possessions, tyaktva sarva parigraha, no sense of possessiveness. So relinquishing all possessions, again, for those of you must be very familiar with this concept. It doesn't mean giving up your possessions. It means having an attitude of trusteeship with all that is in your possession, right? So having a dispossessiveness about your possession, having a sense of responsibility, but not a sense of mindness towards your possessions. So when you reach this attitude in relation to everything that you possess, it's an indication of spiritual growth. Such a person, even though they are functioning in the world and they are moving about just like you and me, even though they are engaging in a relationship or in a business or whatever, they could be a grihastha, they could be in any stage of life. They're doing merely bodily action. They're not incurring further vasanas. They're not accumulating further vasanas. Rajarishi. These people are functioning in the world and playing their part. In fact, playing very important roles. But they are true sages. So it's possible. Spirituality doesn't expect you to resign yourself to a place away from the marketplace, away from the world. No. The beauty, the real beauty, and the real challenge of this journey is to be in the din and roar of the marketplace. Play your part, do your role, and at the same time, internally, be beautifully objective, be completely independent, self-sufficient. That's the wonder of this journey. That's the beauty of this journey. And that's what Karma Yoga can do for you. That's what Karma Yoga can do for you. That's the power of Karma Yoga. While functioning out here, while continuing to do what you need to do, you liberate yourself. That's the power of karma. With that thought, we'll conclude today. And we'll continue this. So I think there's just one more verse before we start the next section. The next section is on Yajna, which is again another very famous, very, very popular and very wonderful section of this chapter, starting from verse number 24. So we'll take that up in the next class. I'm happy to take up any questions before we conclude. So look, there's some.
So why is it sounding from last 2-3 verses?
हाँ
तो बहुत ही impossible चीज है.
हाँ तो मैं वही I was just going to say that look, this is a deep section where he's and look, he's simply putting up an example in front of you. He's saying you follow karma yoga and this is what will happen of you. So if you put yourself, if you place these expectations on yourself that, oh, I have to be content with anything, I have to not be dependent on anything, right? It'll seem impossible. But what he's conveying to you is that this is an outcome of your spiritual journey, right? And it's not all or nothing. It's not all or nothing. You start bit by bit, and that itself will propel you forward. So don't try to equate yourself with a sage. You can't become a Christ overnight. But take inspiration from the sage. Okay, if that's the end goal, what am I doing today to take my first step forward? And these are also indications of growth. These are also indications to measure yourself. If I'm truly performing karma yoga and growing, these qualities will start to show in me. Maybe not complete independence, but a little independence. Maybe not complete contentment, but a little contentment. Not complete objectivity, but a little objectivity. I'll be able to be a little happier. I'll be able to lose get a little less angry or get a little less agitated. Right? And these are all indications that you are growing on the path of becoming a sage. When you become a sage, you'll be Nitya Tripta. When you become a sage, you'll be Nirashraya. Right? But at least it gives you a direction of where to start. And it gives you an idea of what is true growth, who is truly a sage. According to the wise, these are the qualities of a yogi. These are the qualities of a person on the spiritual path. Any other questions? Like any experiment, change occurs suddenly, but through all your efforts, through all your reflection, through all your small bits of genuine effort that you put in, it's all happening in the background, right? So the idea is to take inspiration from this. And any teacher knows that, any Vedantin knows that it's always going to be a minority. If I'm speaking to 100 people, maybe 50 are listening, maybe 10 will be, it'll touch 10 people, and maybe 5 will actually follow up on it, and 2 will actually stay consistent with it, right? It's always like that. So the idea, the process of self-development is first of all, you can't be too hard on yourself. You can't set up too high a goal, because it'll fall flat. Secondly, you can't get frustrated with yourself. When it hits you, it'll hit you. And our job out here is to keep talking and to keep conveying these values, right? So I would highly suggest you keep reading the text, keep adding that layer of perspective, and do your own reflection. Come back with questions. I'm happy to address anything that you may have, and we'll see you again on. When do you want to meet next?
Tomorrow?
Not tomorrow. I have some engagements tomorrow, but I'm happy to meet over the weekend. So I'll just put it out in the group. I'll float it on the group if we can meet over the weekend to make up for Tuesday, right? Okay, thank you so much, and we'll
I
see.
was rereading the chapter 3,
Okay.
and I'm finding that the more we read chapter 3 first, then only it makes more sense to get to what we are reading now. And I was just reading the chapter number 30th shlok, I was reading the right action. So we need to inculcate this first. ये सेट थोड़ा सा भी हो जाएगा, फिर तो अपने आप, फिर आगे तो जो है रिजल्ट है वो.
नहीं, ऐसी बात नहीं है, ऐसी नहीं. I mean, this is also karma yoga, and we'll keep talking about this karma yoga. Chapter 3 is a most direct expression of that, right? But he'll keep coming to that. But we'll keep marching on, right? And we'll keep referencing back to chapter 3 and earlier chapters. But don't think just because you've gone ahead of chapter 3 doesn't mean you've missed the bus. I've said before, there are 10, 12 ideas we're going to discuss, and it's going to be on repeat. So we'll keep referencing. Okay, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the weekend.
Thank you so
Thank you, sir. Thank you.